All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General is now flying back from Sweden. We expect him back in New York in just a few hours. This morning, before leaving, he had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven. In a press conference following that, the Secretary General said the Security Council had had 2 days of very constructive discussions in Sweden, which helped cool matters down and help Council members to move forward in relations to key objectives. That includes, in the case of Syria, fully supporting a political solution and working to achieve the success of the Geneva intra-Syrian talks. Over the weekend, the Secretary General held his retreat with Security Council members at the estate of former Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld in southern Sweden. He expressed his deep gratitude to the Swedish government for organizing the event, saying the venue was highly symbolic. The Secretary General also gave the Dag Hammarskjöld lecture in Uppsala, Sweden, yesterday afternoon, during which he described the former Secretary General as his reference and inspiration, a man of action, an extremely sophisticated diplomat, and a man of culture. He also spoke about the new challenges facing our own time, including global terrorism, climate change, inequalities, cyber warfare, and the need to reestablish the integrity of the refugee protection system. The Secretary General, in his comments that he made in Sweden today, said the Security Council unity on Korea had helped him put on track a peaceful denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. He said the unity of the Security Council, which was able to come together and to have a strong and meaningful set of sanctions, to a certain extent made the Democratic People's Republic of Korea realize that it was necessary to come forward and to enter into dialogue with the international community, and especially with both the Republic of Korea and the United States of America. Over the weekend, as you are aware, the Secretary General in a statement welcomed the Democratic People's Republic of Korea's decision to suspend nuclear tests and to launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles. He said that this positive step forward contributes to building public trust in the longer process leading to the peaceful denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. The Secretary General reiterated the commitment and support of the United Nations system in this endeavor. The full statement is online. Meanwhile, Stéphane de Mistura, the Special Envoy for Syria, briefed the Security Council on members at their retreat in Sweden over the weekend, following his travels earlier to Moscow and Tehran. We've provided a transcript of the press remarks during those two visits, in which he said that the past week was a dangerous one and we needed to bring down the temperature internationally and regionally. Meanwhile, the fact-finding mission team of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons visited one of the sites in Duma on Saturday to collect samples for analysis in connection with allegations of chemical weapons having been used on April 7th. The OPCW will now evaluate the situation and consider future steps, including another possible visit to Duma. The samples collected were transported to the OPCW lab in the Netherlands and then dispatched for analysis to the OPCW's designated labs. Based on the analysis of the sample results as well as other information materials collected by the team, the fact-finding mission will complete its report for submission to the states parties to the Chemical Weapons Convention for consideration. Back here this morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, spoke at the opening session of the Financing for Development Forum, where over the next 4 days, member states will be reviewing how resources can be mobilized more effectively to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Ms. Mohammed said that even though the global economy is growing, weakness in the economic system are putting the development prospects of hundreds of millions of people in jeopardy. She said the systemic response is needed, which involves countries mobilizing domestic resources to achieve the 2030 agenda, enabling a global environment that supports long-term investment and that increases partnerships between governments and the private sector to address financing challenges. She added the United Nations is committed to supporting countries in their efforts to finance and implement the Sustainable Development Goals. I also want to flag that this afternoon at 3 p.m., Ms. Mohammed will be speaking on behalf of the Secretary General at the high-level roundtable on security sector reform and sustaining peace. And in the Security Council this morning, the Secretary General's envoy on youth, Jayathma Wickremesinghe, spoke to members of the Security Council on the findings of the independent progress study on youth, peace, and security. She said the report points to two key issues that need immediate attention: the growing mistrust from young generations towards formal political institutions, the exclusion of young people from political, civic, and economic life. The study also shows that only a small minority of youth ever engages in violence, and many are actively engaging in their own local initiatives to bring peace to their communities. I believe we can all agree the generation represents promise, not peril. We should be seen as an asset, not a problem, she told council members, adding that the report's findings and recommendations are an opportunity for the Security Council to redress the mistrust between young people, their governments, and the multilateral system by opening up new paths of meaningful participation and contribution. And Izumi Nakamitsu, the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, addressed the second session of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Preparatory Committee, and that was in Geneva today. She said the Secretary General is currently developing his agenda for disarmament, which is aimed at re-energizing the international discourse. On the matter of nuclear weapons, she added, the Secretary General is exploring how we can use his moral authority to support our common norms against nuclear weapons, including any proliferation, testing, or use. He intends to seek new ways of facilitating the resumption of dialogue on strategic aims, arms control and disarmament, as well as the promotion of practical measures to prepare for a world free of nuclear weapons. Turning to the Central African Republic, the UN mission there intervened on Sunday in the prefecture of Mambere Kadei in the western part of the country to stop the movement of armed fighters from the Syria group near the locality of Bangula, where they intended to occupy a local gendarmerie outpost. Upon arrival at the village of Nasole, where members of the Syria group had erected a barricade, the peacekeepers were target of enemy fire. The peacekeepers fired back, causing casualties among the attackers. A dozen motorcycles, as well as weapons, were recovered by peacekeeping forces. There's a release from the mission available on that. As you will have seen, we issued a statement yesterday in which the Secretary General strongly condemned the attack on a voter registration center in Kabul, which claimed the lives of many civilians. There's a statement online from him and from the head of the mission, Mr. Yamamoto. And also yesterday, the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action, Michael Bloomberg, announced a contribution of $4.5 million to the UN's Climate Change Secretariat. In a tweet, the Secretary General said he was very grateful to Michael Bloomberg, not only for his generous support of the UN, but also for his global leadership on climate action. The contribution will go towards general operations, including assisting countries to meet targets for cutting greenhouse gases emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. Also want to flag to you a meeting that will take place in Vienna this Wednesday. Matthew Nimitz, the personal envoy of the Secretary General, will meet jointly with Nikos Koutsias, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece, and Nikola Dimitrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and that will be at the UN headquarters in UN office in Vienna. The meeting is part of the United Nations' ongoing efforts to assist the sides in finding mutually acceptable solution to the, quote, name issue. And today we celebrate two languages, English and Spanish. Today is both English and Spanish Language Day. At 3 p.m. On Conference Room 6, there will be a forum discussion on gender-inclusive communications in Spanish, challenges and opportunities, organized by the Mission of Paraguay, which you're all welcome to attend. And today is also World Book and Copyright Day. Coincidentally, the 23rd of April is the date which Cervantes, Shakespeare, and La Vega all died, but it is also the date of birth or death of other prominent authors such as Vladimir Nabokov, Joseph Pla, and Manuel Mejia Vallejo. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. in General Assembly Hall, the President of the General Assembly will convene a meeting, but I will let Brendan talk to you about that because he is his spokesman and not I. There will be a press encounter with the President of Colombia, the SG's Youth Envoy, and the PGA. But again, Brendan will talk about that. And we wanted to thank Antigua and Barbuda, which paid budget dues in full for 2018, bringing us up to, you're all pathetic, 84. There you go. At least you've tried. So go ahead.
Sure. I want to ask you about sexual abuse and exploitation. On Friday at 5 o'clock, or past 5 o'clock, which is now 2 Fridays in a row, there was what some see now as kind of a data dump in terms of the timing of it. The disclosure.
It's not Friday everywhere.
I understand. So,
right.
Okay. At Friday at 6 o'clock in New York in UN headquarters, they disclosed child rape, alleged child rape by Nepali peacekeeper in South Sudan, as well as in MONUSCO, more South African allegations, in this case an adult. And I'm just wondering, it seems like, one, does the UN treat these allegations where it's a child more seriously? And what, all it says is in each of these disclosures is pending, 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 pending. What's the status of the Nepali accused in this case?
The mission in South Sudan received an allegation of sexual abuse involving unidentified members of the Nepalese contingent. The UN has informed, obviously, Nepal of the allegation. We've requested a full investigation be conducted by troop contributing country with the expedited time frame of 90 days, jointly with a team from OIOS. In this respect, Nepal's response, whether we'll investigate the matter, is expected by the 25th of April on. UNMISS, as you know, is a zero, like all of us, have a zero tolerance and no excuse and no second chance approach to sexual exploitation and abuse. The mission reiterates that such acts should be properly investigated, where applicable, criminal prosecution be pursued under the law of the contributing country. I mean, obviously, any act of sexual abuse is horrendous. One involving a child, I think, is especially heinous if one needs to qualify these things.
And just one other South Sudan question. There was a press conference here at 11 by the group Watch List. And among other things, because I hadn't heard this before, the idea of a sitting fee, that government officials are charging money simply to sit down with them to discuss humanitarian access to areas under their control. And I haven't heard that from UNMISS, so I'm wondering, is the UN aware of that? And if so, why haven't they?
I had heard those things as you have. I'm not aware of any, that we are aware of these things. Sir.
There was a massacre today in Hajjah Governorate. More than 30 people were killed in a wedding targeted by the Saudi-led coalition. Do you have any statement on that?
Yes, we've seen these reports. I expect a statement or more information. We're looking into it. Obviously, any deaths of civilians, attack on civilian infrastructure is to be condemned. But again, we're waiting to get a bit more information. I expect something a bit later on. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Tomorrow, Secretary General going to meet Iranian Foreign Minister. Human rights going to be one of the subjects?
We will see what kind of readout we can give you after the meeting. Linda.
Thank you, Steph. You mentioned that the OPCW has collected the samples. I was wondering if there's some kind of time frame in which an assessment evaluation process would take place. You know, in general,
right.
How long it would take place to do this?
Listen, I don't want to fob you off, but I think that's a question for the OPCW. Obviously, especially when you're dealing with samples, I'm sure there are scientific time frames, but that's a question you'd have to ask the OPCW. Mr. Barada, and then Evelyn.
Thank you, Stéphane. After Bakakra in Sweden, so is the SG going to take some decisions regarding the establishment of the independent investigative mechanism as delegated to him by the press elements from the Security Council? Thank you.
I would refer you to the rather extensive press briefing he gave with the Swedish Prime Minister today, in which I think he said there were still issues to be dealt with, but there was, he felt that from the Council's point of view, all agreed that there should be some type of mechanism, but obviously there's still discussions to be had. When I have something a bit more to share with you from the SG side, I will. Evelyn.
Thank you, Steph. On Syria, aside from the fact that they got along with each other, was anything else resolved there at the weekend Sweden conference?
Again, I think it was an important moment to get everybody around the table, and I think the Secretary General spoke extensively at his press remarks this morning, so I would refer you to what he's already said. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And they all said yes, or what?
Again, I would refer you to what the Secretary General said. He's more
Do you have any
eloquent than
update about the returnees to Eastern Ghouta, Douma, and the restoration of services in the area?
No, nothing. Nothing that I've received so far. Mr. Lee.
Sure. To ask you, there's been. It seems like there's in Mogadishu, where there's obviously this support, if nothing else, a support office, and Mr. Keating. there's been some fighting within the army for a base where the UAE had been providing military training. They pulled out. The army is fighting. Seems to go back to this base that the UAE is building in Somaliland. So I'd asked you once before, and you said it was Farhan said it was bilateral. What is the UN doing? There's also a dispute about airspace of Somaliland, which seems to have been grabbed back by Somalia. What's the UN's role in trying to calm this down?
The UN's effort have been to help the Somali authorities regain their authority over the country in many ways, and that's where our support is focused.
So, meaning that the UAE, you're against the idea of the UAE building a base in Somaliland without.
I think I will stick to the answer I just gave you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, did the issue of the nuclear deal with Iran come up in the meeting in Sweden with the Secretary General? Did they discuss it?
Again, I think the Secretary General gave the readout he wanted to give in his press conference. It's rather that he gave today. It's rather extensive. I would refer you to that. Obviously, there were 15 other principals around the table, and I'm sure they would be delighted to take your questions.
I just wanted, because the ICAO, which I guess is a UN body, they had committed to not transferring the airspace. At least that's what people say, that it had been agreed.
Well,
to
I think I think instead of saying what people say, I think we should feel free to reach out to ICAO to see exactly what they're saying.
And do you have
Thank
anything on Madagascar? There
No,
seems
sir.
to be